Hi, everyone. I'm Kristina Norris, and I am from GitHub. I've worked there for 3.5 years. And before I joined the tech industry, I was everywhere from learning and development for PR to real estate management, and helping companies figure out how they comply with OSHA. So I've explored learning and development in a lot of areas, but I can promise you one thing, it has not been nearly as exciting as my experience at GitHub. As Marco said, GitHub is remote first. We're 75% remote. That means we are globally distributed, and that includes most time zones. So as you can imagine, documentation is very important to us, and is at the crux of what GitHub is. If you're not familiar with GitHub, it's essentially a Google Doc in a way, but for code, in a way that you can collaborate that is version controlled, right? And we assigned a lot of our values and principles to our product itself. But to be fair, I think it wouldn't do justice until I gave you a little context. So Github started in 2007. Yes, we've been around for a lot longer than I think people realize, but it wasn't until 2014 that we established managers. Yes, we were a completely flat organization. And things went really well. I mean, hey, we're still here. But there was very much a clear need to establish team leads and managers as we moved along. Now, I joined in 2016. So this is as we promoted a lot of people from within to be our manager population, and they needed a lot of help, right? Because they knew their craft really well, but the soft skills could use a little work. And so we developed some things, and oftentimes we had to try to do this in a very virtual space. So my bread and butter was designing virtual experiences. So when we were acquired in 2018 by Microsoft, a lot of things changed. A lot of them stayed the same. Microsoft purchased us not to take us over or to overrun us by any means. We were doing something good, and they wanted to help us, right? I see Amber over there. She's like, yeah, Microsoft. Thank you. And we love Microsoft. And I especially love Microsoft because it's opened up the world of learning and development for our small organization. Before that, every Hubber got a $2,000 learning and development benefit, and this was an individual credit card. So they could go out, they didn't need their manager's approval, and they purchased that learning. And then in the back end, we can kind of see, what's working, where are they spending their money, which was awesome, right? But that also limited everyone's budget to $2,000. I mean, you all have priced out learning. Try to get a really great leadership development course for $2,000. It's hard to find unless you know some good people. So that being said, being part of Microsoft has opened up the world. And as you saw in their slides earlier, they have so many resources for us that have helped. But going back to when we were acquired, we realized a lot of things were changing. Most importantly, our rhythm of the business. And we knew we had to get managers on board with what was happening, right? This was a community that they were established, but we had never really acknowledged them as their own community. We had communicated with Hubbers as transparently as possible. So that means if you were an individual contributor or a manager, you got the information at the same time. But that often left our managers holding a lot of questions and not sure where to get their answers from. So as we looked in February 2019, so this past February, we said, look, it's time to recognize our managers as a community. They need information first, and they need to know how to prepare their teams for the coming year. So we realized that we had, let's see if this clicker is going to work. It's not working, but, oh, it worked, great. We had 75 days to pull together a week-long event for 300 people. It was a lot. It was a lot, and we knew that we needed to communicate the rhythm of the business, but we also knew that this was an amazing opportunity. Not only to introduce our managers to one another, because mind you, most of them have only met on Zoom or in Slack channels, but we also had an opportunity to build trust in person. We're finding people from all over the world. This was huge, and we didn't want to mess up our chance. But we also recognized our small and mighty team of 2 people had a lot to do in 75 days. So the most important thing is obviously understanding what your stakeholders want, right? Our leadership team wanted to communicate the rhythm of the business, but what did our managers want out of this? So we set up some design studios where we brought in some managers and we said, look, what do you need from a manager support network? At this point, manager communities, the term wasn't even defined. What do you need from a support network of managers was the question. So we thought about it. We did a lot of info sessions. And essentially what we came up with was this graphic, because along with the info sessions during registration that we had to open up while we didn't know where we were going, we asked managers what they wanted out of this experience. And as you can see, it was really about being empowered. It was about connecting with other managers in an authentic space and building that trust. And most importantly, they want to be motivated after this experience, right? Nothing's worse than sitting in a conference all day and being talked to. That being said, it's a necessary evil at times. But we recognize what managers wanted most out of this was an organic space to build trust, to find their peers, to share celebrations and wins and failures and best practices. They wanted this community, and we wanted to give it to them, which was really exciting. And so it became one of our core design principles, was how do we create this really organic space where we can encourage connection? And it really came down to, okay, if it belongs in a one-way conversation, it does not belong at this event. This was about connecting each other. So as our leadership team, as our key stakeholders came and said, we want to do a presentation on OKRs, we were like, that's great. Is it interactive? How are these people going to talk to one another? And when they couldn't give us the answer, it got cut. We didn't have enough time. So funny enough, that 75 days played on our side. So as we continued, we did these design principles, and we knew that we can control feel. So that's where our logo came from, this MM. And from it, we recognized that the white here, this framework, this was what we could provide as an organization. We could provide the framework that you need to be successful, but it's up to every manager in the room to decide how they were going to grow, how they were going to blossom in this space, and who they were going to grow next to, right? Who had the information that they were looking from. So when you bring together a group of people, you know that introductions are very important, right? And so we had to be very particular about this white line, this white framework that we put into place to say, okay, we can't just throw these people in a room and expect them to talk. They're going to just go to their teams. They're just going to go to the people that they talk to in Slack. They're not going to talk collaboratively. So we decided some community guidelines. And we made sure that they tied back to our theme. So the first one, contribute to the community. We asked everyone to sit, and we did that wonderful breathing exercise that I think Kelly had led. Great job, Kelly. And we asked them, think of a raindrop, right? Think about the ripple effects that it has. And your contribution to this space is that raindrop. What kind of ripple effect do you want to have here? And that's what you can do as a manager, right? Every time you're present, every time that you give space for someone else, and every time you actively listen, you are sending those positive ripple effects out. And then finally, we asked them to be curious, right? So everyone's skeptic, right? Everyone thinks that they can do things better, but we asked them to come and to experience this like a scientist, to treat this community as a lab, right? To trial and error, to test things on, to know that this is a safe space, because we've all failed. And if you haven't been trying hard enough. Finally, respect was key, right? Aretha knows what she's talking about. We know that that's the core of what makes meaningful connection, and without it, it doesn't feel authentic. And then finally, from the start of time, we've been sharing stories to make these connections. So as soon as you walk into an experience and you start saying, well, you should have done this better, or this is how I would have done it, that's never going to relate to anyone. And we wanted to make sure that was really clear, because we had a bunch of really bright people coming into the room who had their own grasp of their craft and their reality, but they had to believe that someone else had something to offer them. And the best way to do that was through storytelling. So as we created these guidelines, we recognized that this is how we wanted to create our space here, But it was also really important of how we wanted to continue this community space. So as managers met in person, we didn't want this the first time or the last time to actually have these conversations. And so that's when we reached out to LifeGuide, who's here, and Marco and to really talk about, okay, we're bringing together all of these really amazing people. We want to set up a framework that lives on after this experience. And so what we found is that with this global community, there was some really regional specifics, right? So we recognized that we needed to create smaller groups of connection because we recognized that more than 10 people, no one's gonna get heard in this conversation and no one's gonna have a meaningful connection. So we brought together managers in smaller groups. We called them squads, and these are the colored dots. And we assigned them colors, and we put it on their lanyards. So when they walked in, they had no idea, but they noticed that person that they talked to that may live down the street or maybe in the state nearby had the same color, but they didn't know why because they weren't on the same team. But then as we were creating these, we were like, oh, okay, this is great. We have these groups of 10 or smaller that would be great at conversations. But we also recognize, well, imagine if we could hear back from these managers. Imagine if we could identify the themes across our manager community. What's bothering them? What are the questions that are coming up with their teams? Because often they're not craft specific, right? They're often, we didn't get the info on this, we don't know where to find it, or we're hitting this hurdle, whatever it may be. So we realized in order for us to get this information back, we needed to use our tool. We needed to use GitHub, right? Because we're really good at documentation. We're largely remote, so when we have a meeting, we share back the notes regardless of if anyone's ever gonna reference them or look at them. So we use that same practice as we went through. But it was me. You know, I'm the administrator behind this. I can't commit to reading however many dots are on this page on a monthly basis and sussing out the themes there. We needed to create a higher structure that helped us create this two-way communication between the management team and leadership. Because it's great if I know what's going on, but it's way more important if our leadership team knows what's happening. So we started a grassroots effort, and we intentionally designed it to be that way. I hand drew this, but we wanted to show that anyone can be a part of this, right? So what the first thing we did was identify, okay, we need some captains, we need some managers to help us read through all those comments every month, right? And really pull out the themes that they're seeing based on the feedback, right? So we're saying, okay, managers, come and help us. This is you. You'll be responsible for these squads, and you'll have first access to the leadership team, and you'll also have direct access to HR to help solve your problems, right? That wasn't enough of a selling point, believe it or not, but they did see an opportunity for leadership development. And to go back to Jacqueline, I believe it was, when she talked about building it into being a great citizen, right? Is how do we reward this behavior? So we immediately realized that we need to reward these captains as we go along and through our reflection and rewards process in order for this to be successful. So we finally got 8 managers to sign up, 8 managers globally, which was really exciting. And from there, we shared our idea. We said, okay, we're gonna have this really great event, and we're gonna get everyone together, and we're gonna have them talk. And they said, well, what are we gonna talk about? And I said, I don't know, the experience that you're in. And that's where we went to LifeGuide and we said, look, how do we create meaningful connection here, right? We've got the squads in place. We now have our captains, our sponsors, all of the figures are in place here, but how do we make for this meaningful connection? So they helped us decide, okay, in our 3-day experience, right, where does this fit? Well, we took a risk. It was the first thing we did. Well, the first thing we did was we brought a taste of form. Can you raise your hand if anyone in this room is familiar with form? A handful. Okay, so let me just briefly explain the background, but I'm sure there's plenty of people in the room that can do it much better than I. But it's a light framework, right, that sets some ground rules similar to our community guidelines that set the expectation of how you're supposed to interact together. So one of the first things is you bring your essentially best and worst from the week. And then from that, you pick a presentation topic about one of those things or potentially something that's interesting to the group. You structure it through time, and then you have a closeout of when you're gonna meet again. Sounds simple enough, right? But having I been in the front of the room and tried to explain that, everyone would have been like, you see Christina up there? She wants us to talk about this. I'm not talking about that. So we recognized that, and we brought Marco here. We brought Marco to our event to make sure that he was able to help us with communicating this. So the first day, we introduced them as squads, and we essentially said, hey, these are your peers. Get used to them because you're going to see them monthly. How exciting is that? And you'll have a chance to debrief this whole experience with them. And we walk through this formalized form structure to just have them try it on for size. And then 2 days later, after they've gone through all of our more detailed rhythm of the business and skill learning, we had them do it again, but this time without the hand-holding of Life Guide. And we had our captains and our squad leaders, which was just a member within a squad, we had them lead this framework. And we had already created a repo with these frameworks, so it was easily able to be brought into their own and easily fill it out so that they could automate it. It would populate every month, and someone would be responsible for filling it out in the meetings. So we gave them a taste of form, and then we gave them a chance to practice it. And then when we asked them to practice it, we could have asked them during that presentation time to talk about what they learned during this 3 days, or debrief on a specific session. But we were really nervous that we would never get them to meet again. So the only call to action that we had for them at that second point was to share their date for their next meeting. That way, I could help hold them accountable for actually continuing this effort. So we did it. This is an example of the room. We got 300 people to sit into circles, to stretch, and to try this framework on for size with Marco in the front of the room. And honestly, the most important part of it is this timer down here. Because the biggest piece of feedback that we heard was, I don't have enough time. I wanted to keep talking. This is so great. And we said, good, meet again. So it was really great, and we loved it. And we loved what Marco was able to come up and share his experience as an engineer about how he was looking for community in his efforts and how he was looking for a group not necessarily so focused on his exact role, but focused on him as a human being. Because that's what a community is about. It's about learning and it's about sharing, but it's also about recognizing each other's as people, which was huge. So, with that, I think it was also helpful to share, or that Marco shared, you know, this is supposed to feel a little weird, right? It's weird to meet new people at times, and especially when you're behind your computer most days out of the year and you're not having these personal interactions. So just them saying, okay, right now that we're just forming, right? And I would say, honestly, 6 months out, or not even, we're still storming and norming, right? Some groups are doing really well, other groups are not meeting as often or finding complications. But at the end of the day, regardless, this two-way communication is performing. We're able to use them as test groups as we design new policies within HR and programs. We're able to get their buy-in early than just shipping it and hearing all their feedback and how much they hate us. We're able to actually utilize this community like never before. So for me, this has been a win. And actually earlier today, we just had our second captains and sponsors meeting. So we were able to raise themes around the community, have our leadership team share back communications, and just re-engage this population. People are excited, but they also recognize that there's still a lot of work to do. With that, I wouldn't be a true learning and development professional if I didn't offer some resources. So of course, there's Life Guide, who helped us put together this live experience. But these two books were my Bible when it came to creating this engaging experience, this live experience. I can't sing their praises enough, honestly, and they're very, very easy reads. So if I know that Amber and Lisa had recommended a great book, please add this to your list. It really helped kind of understand the principles, why we were designing them in certain ways, and why we were bringing these people together. Because again, with a 72% remote culture, taking people away from their families, away from their homes, is a huge ask. And we wanted to do so responsibly. So that's all I've got for you, friends. Can I answer any questions?
Apologies if I missed this in the presentation, but how did you decide to choose like the squads? And
that's a great question.
For the captains, like what is their responsibility in terms of like managing their squads?
That is a really great question. So the first thing we thought of about putting these squads together was we thought if the goal is for them to meet regularly, what is the biggest blocker of meeting regularly? Anyone can guess? Time and time zones. Yes, time zones are really hard. Asking a marketer in EMEA to meet with someone in HQ, there's like a 2-hour block that can possibly happen. So when you think about there's only 6 hours a week that this could possibly happen, yeah, of course you don't have time to do that. So we recognized that geographic location was going to be our help in getting us to that first goal. Now, I'm not saying that was perfect. We're finding some flaws in it because we recognize that we hire globally different crafts more than others. So there's some squads that are largely sales-based, whereas, say, in our headquarters, the squads are very diverse in what crafts they're in. And then your second question is, how did we define the roles and responsibilities of our captains? Because that was a huge ask. And we made sure right up front that we weren't putting too much on these people because they would have never signed up otherwise. And so what we made really clear for them is that you're in control of your region, right? We know that we want them to meet monthly, we want to share back information, and here's a framework on how we can make this happen. And the thought was that we didn't want to over-engineer it, right? We wanted to give these leaders an opportunity to show their leadership skills. And what we found is that these managers could design a program even better than I could because they could automate it. They could automate it in GitHub. So they built these bots that allowed them to nudge automatically. So it took away a step that I would have already put in place that didn't need to happen. So it was a really beautiful thing when we saw these leaders step up to the plate, these people who are first-line managers that have never really had that much exposure to our leadership team, and watch them really rise to the challenge. Of course, I was there to help support and say, hey, here's how I think this should go, and here's how we can practice, but I was blown away with what they were able to create. Great questions.
I just wanted to say I love this logo. It literally inspires me. And I just wanted to say congrats because you really nailed it.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it. Yeah, we're planning for 2020 now. So if anyone else has some great recommendations or approaches on how to bring managers together to thrive, I would love to hear it because I feel like we set the bar pretty high and I'm nervous now.
So it seems that your fear was that people would not want to meet each other again. My sense is like if people are working remotely, they would be hungry, they would be wanting to meet for that connection. I mean, and it doesn't just apply to managers.
Right.
So did you get any feedback about like, oh yeah, we from the managers like, we want to connect more. This has been really eye-opening, whatever.
Yeah, 100%. And we've always heard that, right? Hubbers across the board, that's what we call our internal employees, Hubbers. Hubbers have always said they want to connect. But then we scheduled the time, and the 15 people that signed up, 3 people show up. Because, hey, there's stuff we got to do. And finding time for learning and development, I mean, when I ask the room, what's the biggest blocker? We all know it, right? And so it's convincing them that this time is worth it. And so that's where we found the form framework to be really valuable because without putting too much hand-holding or too much structure on it, that organically created the experience that made it worth it. Now, we're still finding that there's groups that are saying, hey, this is becoming a support session, and I actually want to do some other things, and we're iterating off of it. But we needed this community. We needed it years ago. But now we have it, and we're tweaking from it. Ship and iterate, that's kind of part of our culture, and that's how we kind of see all of these different steps. Thank you.
So did you collect any kind of data to figure out how effective these sessions were or how they actually help managers do their job better? And then are you using that to kind of, evangelize or advertise for your 2020?
Yes, so that's a great question. We just recently, so we do a quarterly pulse on the business overall, but I'm not able to add questions to it directly. So I did my own separate engagement survey, and we based we did NPS, which right now is low. I think it was 10 to begin with, so we have a lot of space to grow, right? But hey, it's better than 0 or the negative numbers, because remember, NPS goes either way. But then on top of that, we asked them, how successful do you feel that we are working towards X goals? And so we had defined certain goals. One of them was essentially peer-to-peer learning. Another one was manager onboarding. And what we found through this experience was that managers didn't even realize they could use this as an onboarding experience for other managers. So with that information, we're now completely revamping the manager program. Without that feedback from our community, we would have never identified that as a problem. We assumed, hey, we bring you into the squad, we gave you all the script and how to explain this community and what resources are available for managers, but it just wasn't happening. So with this, we're identifying these flaws, and that's exactly what we should be doing, because otherwise, we're working towards HR initiatives, and as fun as that is, I like to serve the people that want to learn and that I'm responsible for teaching. So great question, and we're still learning. Results aren't like through the roof, but at the end of the day, they're meeting, and that was internally our biggest goal, and we're seeing regularity in that. So to me, it's successful.
It seems like this meetup is like a huge success, and I'm really, really happy for you.
Thank you.
And for GitHub. I was curious if any reporting or if there's been any feedback from a broader audience inside of GitHub that also wants to do meetups. This is kind of related to a similar question before, but not necessarily being, company-wide, but are there other demographics that you think would benefit from this type of structure inside of GitHub?
Yeah, 100%. The great thing about it is that we do have a budget for meetups in general. So once a year, a team will come together. Now, how you define team is very specific, depends on who you're talking about. It could be a collaborative team working on a project, or it could be all of marketing, for example. And they get a set budget and they go off. So we're seeing those organically happen, but we had never really recognized our manager community as a community that needed to be standalone and have some time together. And it was really impactful. One of the decisions we made, for example, we're based here in San Francisco. We took everyone out of San Francisco because we know when people host these meetups in San Francisco, anyone that's typically based in this office doesn't really disconnect. They don't actually walk away from their work. They're still somewhat connected. So in order for us to create an experience where they could really fully be present, we had to put them in a place that could be present. So thank you for the question. I appreciate it. But yeah, I would love to see more of these, especially for our employee resource groups.
I felt that a lot just inside of seeing how events go and the challenges of getting people unplugged. A second question that I have about the meetups is in terms of, you've mentioned a lot about the publishing of information and documenting everything. I was curious if there's, given that it's a dedicated group, if there's any difference between public information or any private information, if there's a sense of like a secure, almost safe space for these groups to be discussing anything sensitive, or if the idea is, no, we want to have the benefits of this open to all our employees, not just managers.
Yeah, so for the longest time, everything was transparent. You could see every conversation that's happening, and we still do have that in a sense. But we have created now a private manager repo. And the point of that is not to only share information with them, it's just to share it with them first. Because at the end of the day, we can put stuff in a repo, but unless you're plugged into that repo, you're watching it and you're getting the notifications, you're never gonna see it. So managers are that extra kind of boost, that extra marketing ability, or that extra sense of security, that your manager knows what's going on. They're plugged into the business and you can go to them for questions. So we don't necessarily treat it as it's private and no one can know. It's more of, we're tiering now the way that communications come out, because getting blasted with information through Slack and Google and Team and whatever else communication on top of GitHub can be really, really overwhelming. It's okay.
But to clarify, I meant more anything that they end up producing rather than information that.
Okay. So the squad's sharebacks. So squad sharebacks, yes, the captains have decided that they have their own private repo for each of their regions. Now, I do think that there is some value, obviously, in bringing all of these managers together for these discussions, but it has just felt really noisy. And so what's happening, instead of having a repo that's dedicated for this share back, what happens is that they're up-leveled in these meetings, that, like the one that we just had today, that the key themes come across. And so we share those key themes back into the manager repo so that everyone's on the same page, but then the captains go back to their region and says, hey, you know that one question that we were really curious about? Well, it's here. We answered it here, but here's what it really means to us. Because we find that across our regions, the needs, while are similar, can be very different, right? When employees talk about benefits in HQ versus maybe in Poland, it's very different what they're talking about. So being very specific and targeting it towards that person so that they know that they're getting the information that's relevant to them has been important. I hope that helps. Awesome. Thanks. Awesome. Thank you all.